Welcome back to another episode of My Trauma's Chronic by My Chronic. In this episode, we're going to dive deep into the world of education and its incredible impact on individuals and communities. In today's episode, we have the privilege of speaking to the remarkable Maureen McKenna, the former Executive Director of Education. Get ready to be inspired as we explore Maureen's journey, her passion for education, and the innovative approaches she has championed throughout her career, from empowering educators to transforming the lives of students. Can you share with us some of your earliest experiences that ignited your passion for education?
So, I didn't really like school. Primary school was fine. But when I got to secondary school, I could do it. It wasn't any difficulty with doing school, but I just didn't like it. It just didn't float my boat at all. So I left at the end of 5th year. And I think that, what I do remember, I remember one maths teacher. So, how many children remember that one good adult in their life, that person that just flicked a switch. And he was a principal teacher of maths. I was good at maths. I enjoyed maths, and he taught in a very different way. So it was very investigative. It wasn't didactic. And it showed me that teaching doesn't have to be chalk and talk, which I think is why. So I went off I'd applied to do accountancy. I got accepted. And then like the week before, I thought, oh my God, that would be like the most boring thing in the universe. So I withdrew from that and just went and picked subjects that I quite liked. And I was good at maths. So I just kept the maths going and had a happy old time at university. And then that was okay.
Wow. Yeah, I feel like there's at least one teacher that from secondary school, especially secondary school, where it's like extremely tough. New transitions, new people, new sets of like lessons and stuff like that. But there is one teacher it's great that you had that experience. And it's always great when somebody does something unique. It's more captivating, more inclined to learn.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
So how did your own education journey shape your belief in the transformative powers of education?
So, I started teaching in 1982 up in the northeast of Scotland. And then I came back to Strathclyde, and then in the northeast, much less populated than Glasgow. And they were much more up for promoting young teachers. So I was promoted within 2 years of qualifying, which in the Central Belt was pretty unheard of because it was so traditional in how it looked. But they gave me lots of opportunities to do development work, to work with the national agencies. And, education is fundamental, isn't it? And of course, I love maths. So everybody does maths. And that became my passion. So it started off with the teaching of mathematics. How could you teach maths that would get children and young people excited by maths? That it wasn't just opening a book and doing an exercise out of it, that actually you use maths in your everyday. And I was very lucky that I got all those different experiences. And then when I was working in Kilsyth Academy, which is near Glasgow, I had the opportunity, somebody asked if I fancied being a schools inspector. So I became an HMI. And the learning in that was just fantastic. It was an amazing job. So to have the privilege of sitting at the back of so many teachers' lessons, and whether they were good or bad, I had that learning experience, because you could then unpick the lesson and see where the trigger was of what went well, what didn't go well, and that engaging with so many teachers. Oh, I learned so much in that role. And I suppose my passion just grew and grew about education. And when the job came up in Glasgow, the director's job, it was a challenging, area, because Glasgow didn't perform well. It has the highest levels of poverty in Scotland. It's the biggest local authority in Scotland. But oh my goodness, the opportunities that were there were just too exciting not to take up that challenge. So yeah, I loved it.
It seems like it was like the provision that you were talking about earlier that allowed you to work with national agencies and stuff like that really set you up for your career in education. I feel like employers often forget that this is like a second home, like how they say schools is a second home for children. Because usually they're like, okay, they go clock in and clock out, but you spend the majority of your time there more than you do at home, and they care about your future. It's like, and I feel like that also reduces the massive turnover in education as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that, I've always taken the philosophy of everybody needs a helping hand. So if people with more experience than me had not spotted something in me and given me those opportunities, I wouldn't have had that range of experiences. So it's not about the number of years you've served. It's about what you've done in those years. So I would speak to teachers who would say, you can't tell me what to do. I've had 27 years experience, but it could be the same experience repeated 27 times. So you've never actually progressed in your thinking or broadened out. So, I've always encouraged head teachers and other people to look at younger staff and not say, well, they don't have to serve 8 years, don't put a time limit on it. Look at their potential and give them those experiences that will broaden them out, allow them to be innovative and creative and not be restricted, because sometimes we can just be a wee bit carried away about compliance and restricting things when actually people need to be creative and to bring that. So teaching, you need to have that creativity in your teaching, don't you? It's like you're on a stage at the front and everybody has a different style, and that's the craft of teaching, isn't it?
Yeah, and I feel like it's like it's not just getting through the curriculum. It's just to engage with the young person. I feel like this also has other underlying things, right? If you're just like a fun, bubbly teacher who also teaches well, it's like in the sense that the children's emotional needs are met and stuff like that, and they perform much better in lessons. And because it's like you don't know what's going on at home or anything like that. So it's like being that person that's so trusting and able to allow them to learn in a safe environment. I feel like that is, if I feel like once you achieve that, the education will automatically come into place, the behaviors and
Absolutely.
lessons and everything like that. Did you
Yeah.
face any challenges earlier in your career?
Oh my goodness, yes. Try being a young woman. As you know, well, you are a young Asian woman, even more so, and the challenges that you will have faced. So yeah, I mean, as a young woman, of course, although women dominate the teaching workforce, when you try to move up the ladder, it's dominated by men, isn't it?
Yeah.
So, I mean, I
Tell me
once
about
didn't
it.
get, yeah, I once didn't get a promoted post because one of the parents had said at the interview that I just had a baby. So therefore, how could I take on this senior post? Honestly, I was so angry. It's like a red mist moment when I got that feedback. So yeah, but those challenges are there to be overcome. And the longer, kind of older I got, the more experience I had under my belt, the more patient I suppose I became about those challenges. So I didn't let them stress me out. I didn't get uptight about them because that's a waste of energy. So that wastes energy. And what you need to do is to take a step back, have a little reflect and think, and then sometimes you just have to kind of tackle it in a different way. So you never lower your bar. So you keep
Definitely.
your expectations high, never lower your bar. You might have to take a little bit longer to get there, to
Yeah.
get everybody on side. And when I was director in Glasgow, it was the first time they'd had a woman director of education. So it was kind of different for them too.
Yeah.
Guess what? It works.
Of course. And I feel like they're like very surprised when it does work, and when you bring in new things and you're getting all these results in your work, and they're like surprised. And I'm like, well, you wouldn't be as surprised if I wasn't the first woman to take on this role.
Exactly. Exactly.
Do you have any mentors or influential figures who guided you along your educational journey? And if so, how do they impact your career choices and beliefs?
Do you know, I didn't really actually. I've been asked this quite a few times, and actually I don't. Apart from that, the maths teacher, and I wouldn't have described him as a mentor in the slightest, but he just showed me that you could teach in a different way. But I haven't, there's nobody else I would say, oh gosh, they were just fantastic and what an influence in my life. I'm so sorry.
That's great. Um, what what about this school inspector role reinforced your dedication? Was that specific moment, or were there other moments where that reinforced your dedication to improving education for all students?
So I joined the inspectorate because I felt that I would learn more. So it's always about learning. And I worked in the inspectorate with some of the cleverest people I have ever been with. They were fabulous, experts in their field, and the teamwork amongst the HMI. Honestly, it was a fantastic 7 years that I worked with, and I got to see education in all different contexts. So in the most deprived communities in Scotland, and equally in the most rural communities in Scotland. So on islands, out in the Western Isles and up in Shetland and in Orkney, and to be able to see how education works in those different contexts and the importance of us, inspectors or teachers or whatever, understanding the context of the child to be able to maximize their potential through education. So it's not about a one size fits all. It's about being professionally curious about the child and their context, and then being able to fit the education to the child. Whereas I think too often it's the child being made to fit into the education.
Yeah, I feel like it's like a much bigger problem, especially in mainstream education. I feel like it's like 30 students, 30, sometimes even more, in one classroom with one teacher. And
Yeah,
it's like,
but but that also makes for a sparky can be a sparky learning environment. So if it's too small, you don't get the same dynamic
that's
going on.
true.
So I don't think we should get hung up about the numbers. I think one of the problems that we've got is that the curriculum can be too rigid. So the curriculum being delivered in secondary, the kind of pressures on schools to, with performance tables and all that kind of thing. And don't get me wrong, qualifications are really important because qualifications allow you as the young person to be able to make choices about different career pathways.
Yeah.
But the curriculum should be adaptable and flexible to be able to meet the differing needs of students. And I think sometimes it's square pegs and round holes, and we don't flex enough within schools. I think that Scottish schools are much better at flexing
Yeah.
than currently within the English system, is my experience so far.
I feel like the English system, even like if you go to something much more recent, as in markings and exams, I feel like it's much more rigid. And you know, some may argue it's like, oh, we have a bigger population, so you know, you have to factor in the universities. But I'm like, I feel like it should be like an equal standard for all, because it's like, because we have a bigger population doesn't mean there's individuals who are struggling and trying their best to get those results. And, you know, they sacrifice their mental health. They put so much work and stuff into getting those.
It's also the curriculum that's currently offered at the moment through the recommendation for DFE is a very traditional one. So, you know, it's the maths, the English, the science, the social subject, a language, you know, all that's kind of progress 8 attainment. It's all that's kind of dictated. Well, what about vocational qualifications? What about in London, you know, offering hospitality qualifications that would give a very strong, given the amount of hospitality in London, a strong career option? You know, what about offering that in schools? Would there may be a group of young people who would be much more interested in coming to school if that career option was made open to them? In Glasgow, one of our schools worked with the local housing association, and the housing association delivered housing qualifications in school, and those young people then got a pathway into employment. So they became really popular. A small number of young people, about a dozen of them, but it made a huge difference to them.
Yeah, it's absolutely amazing. And I feel like the guy, the name just slipped, but there's a guy who goes to visit every local authority for like for 18 months, and then feeds back to central government about what needs to be changed. And his views really align with yours as well. So, you know, looking back at your journey, you've had quite a lot of different experiences. What advice would you give to aspiring educators who are just starting out?
To love their job and to love young people. And if you don't love young people, then you're never going to be able to be successful and love your job. Because you know, when I was employing teachers, even from when I was principal teacher, I wouldn't take anybody unless at some point during their interview, they mentioned that they loved young people. They might not use the love word, but it has to come through, because you wouldn't believe some teachers who come into teaching thinking it's some kind of an easy number. And it's not. It's really hard work. So you have to work hard at it, but the rewards are immense. But you need to have a passion for young people.
Yeah. When I sit on interview panels for like the NHS or the care homes and stuff like that, I'm just like, there's certain things I'm like, you have not mentioned anything about young people at all. Or even the organisation, My Children's Chronic by McKenna's, is everybody we hire from like video editors onwards, like everybody would have, if they just mention the qualifications, I'm like, yeah, I already know that you're capable. I've seen your CV.
Right.
But what about, you know, trauma, they haven't mentioned trauma once, or they don't even know what job role they applied for. I'm just like, okay, thank you. Never, okay, not then.
Yeah,
But I feel like it's
absolutely.
important to have a passion. I feel like without passion, there's no drive.
Absolutely. And my advice when people going into interviews, and I say to them, let your passion come through. Let it come through in the interview, in a managed way, but you need to show that you're absolutely loving your job and loving what you do. That needs to come through.
Definitely. What are some of the major challenges you've observed within the education system and institutions, and how do you believe they can be addressed?
So there's always challenges in any role. And I think that so just now I'm doing work down south mainly, within the English system. And I'm learning a lot and looking at the difference between the Scottish system and the English system. And I don't think that either system is perfect. And I don't think that we should get hung up on developing a governance system that we think is the be all and end all, because I don't think there is one. But what we do need to be is that we need to be all facing in the same direction. And at the moment, and I think that one of the pluses of the Scottish education system is that there is a link from that golden thread that runs from government policy all the way down right into the classroom. And I think there's a strong alignment there about compassion and care, about nurture, about well-being of children and young people. And there's quite clear statements set out in policy. So you've got the raising attainment on one side and how important that is, but recognizing that we need to look after our children and young people, and their well-being is absolutely critical to that too. And fundamentally for me, it's about the rights of the child at the centre of it all. And in the English system, I see schools and academies, trusts who are absolutely aligned, who they're placing the well-being of children and young people. They talk about being at the heart of their communities. They're doing work that brings families in and understands. I spoke to one foundation and they've got a fantastic phrase, and they talk about supporting children from cradle to career, which I loved. So I thought that I just thought that absolutely spot on. But there are others, and the DFE guidance and advice, which doesn't align as strongly to that. And so you get, it's quite, well, it's a very fragmented system, but you're not getting the needs of children being placed. And, the overt importance of anti-racist education. We need to flush that out, and we need to stand up and be counted about it and develop teachers' skills and young people's skills in racial literacy, in being competent to be able to talk about the issues that affect young people directly, and understand that if we don't walk in their shoes, then how will we be ever be able to meet their learning needs? So the challenges I've faced over the years, that are honestly, they are countless, right? Absolutely countless. And I could pick out tons of them, but I think it's much more important to think about what are the big kind of strategic approaches. So I think it is about getting your policies lined up. That doesn't mean that we all do the same thing, but it means that we've all got to face in the one direction. And I think that's what I tried to do in Glasgow. I used to think about Glasgow as being this giant oil tanker. And on the oil tanker, I had 12,000 plus staff, all involved in education. And I didn't need them to be doing the same thing, but I needed them all to be facing in the one direction. And that took time, and it took, years of incrementally sticking to the same priorities, making some decisions that maybe went against a government minister at that time, because we knew it would be for the greater good. And it did, at the end of the day, it has improved outcomes, and educational outcomes in Glasgow are significantly better. But it is, how do you get people facing in the one direction and sharing that vision of what we need to make our school system as successful as possible?
Yeah, Rome wasn't built in one night. one.
You have to be patient.
Yeah, I feel like in the systems, especially when there's so many like ministers or MPs and central government being like, no, we think this should be in place, but the people that are so close to the children and young people, they know the best. And sometimes I feel like if you just are these people that majority of people that work in education, they're willing to make a difference. That's like for majority of them, that's one of the reasons why they joined the job. And if you just ask them, I'm sure they would like to set some time aside to explain to you what they think, not what you think 500 billion years ago that should be in place, because that's not going to work, is it? But that it's like that is what especially the English system needs. What are the key factors do you think are contributing to educational inequalities? And what strategies have you found effective in your former role as executive of education in improving access to quality education for all students?
So clearly just now, and has been forever, poverty, is the biggest impact. It matters where you live. So it still matters where you live. If you do postcode analysis with deprivation data, there is still a strong link between areas of disadvantage and lower attainment. So in Glasgow, our challenge was to raise attainment for all, for each and every young person. And that meant that we had to work with partners. So you couldn't say that it was the role of schools alone. So you can't put everything onto the schools to say, cure the world. But what you said previously is absolutely right. We need to listen to the voices of children and young people. Children and young people today have more pressures and issues impacting on them than 30, 40 years ago. They're different. They're just totally different. The social media and the pressures on them to find employment. There's no such thing as a job for life now. So we need to build our children's confidence and resilience. So I used to talk about the children coming to school in Glasgow, and they would come for their first day at school in primary one, and they would have a little backpack on. And our backpacks, our Glasgow children's backpacks were empty. And in a leafy suburb where families came from a more privileged background, when they arrived at school, their little backpacks were full. They were full of experiences of going to museums, of going to the park and playing freely, of being on holidays, of seeing their parents read the Glasgow Herald. They potentially they would be read to every night. They would have a house full of books. And their little backpacks were full of all those experiences. But our children from families that were experiencing disadvantage, addiction, poverty, they came with empty backpacks, and it was our job to fill those backpacks with those experiences. So we focused on outdoor learning, and we had fire pits put into our nurseries. Not that our health and safety people were over pleased about that. We brought forest schools into the city centre, so they could do forest schools as if it was, out in the countryside, but we have parks. So all you need is a few trees. You don't need to be in a bus and miles away. But we gave them free swimming lessons. We took them to museums. We took them to the theatre. So it was our role to fill those little backpacks. But it's such a gap between those. And the other is when children from a more privileged background have that ability to be resilient. So even if you help our children from a less privileged background to get to university, how do they have that resilience to get into the employment, to get into the workplace, to move beyond the boundaries of their own homes? So we had to give them that opportunity to make decisions, to manage themselves, to be able to manage their own emotions and understand their own emotions. And they had to have opportunities to perform, to lead in their school, to take an assembly, to lead a club, to have 20 committees in the school so that they were part of the decision making, so that when they went to a job, they were able to talk about those breadth of experiences that employers look for. And in all that, you're building their confidence and their resilience, and the fact that, you know, I used to hear at the beginning, this is Glasgow, what do you expect? Well, actually, what I expected was that the children in Glasgow got exactly the same level of education as I would expect for my children. And I expected every teacher to deliver to Glasgow's children as if it was one of my children they were delivering to. And that is a never-ending message. You need to constantly, consistently remind people that that's what we are here for. We are here to serve children, not the other way around. And we need to give them their voice in order for them to be able to be the next generation. They are the civic society of the future.
How do you approach the issue of education disparities among different socioeconomic backgrounds? And what steps can be taken to bridge the gaps? You mentioned a few by, like forest school and, what just slipped out of my mind?
Well, it's about looking at those experiences and the experiences that some young people have. So there's a lovely bit of research called One Good Adult. And what it looked at was, what it said was, if you have one good adult in your life, then that can make the difference. So one of the things we do is we run a mentoring. So we have volunteers. I volunteer. I still go into a secondary school in Glasgow. I meet with a young person once a week. We chew the fat, and we talk about her school. We talk about a little bit, if she wants to talk about home, I'm happy to talk about home. We talk about a whole range of things. We talk about that I am the one good adult, and every so often we talk about what she might want to do with her subject choices, and we keep on track, and we talk about going to university or going into employment. And we've got that in 30 secondary schools, and there's over, in fact, I think it's 2,000 young people getting that conversation with one good adult once a week. Because so many of our families don't have that breadth of experience. They might come from a workless family, so a couple of generations where people haven't worked. So how do you raise those young people's aspirations? But I don't have any magic fairy dust I can bring out of my pocket and sprinkle across and say, well, if you do this, this, and this, then, we'll get equality. You have to keep revisiting it. You have to keep looking at it. And, latterly, when I was director, we shone a spotlight on taking the kind of Black Lives Matter initiative to look at the experiences of young people from minority ethnic. Now in Glasgow, if you come from a minority, if you identify as minority ethnic, you perform better than white children. If you have English additional language, you perform better than those who don't. But that doesn't mean to say that the experiences are equal. And that doesn't mean to say that we don't need to do something about it. So you have to keep going back to look at all these experiences that young people and to say, well, what can we do to address them? How can we bring their voice out and make sure that we are listening and that we are responding to children's needs, because they are presenting with increasing complexity without a shadow of a doubt. So sorry, no fairy dust to sprinkle across, but a sharp focus, and I talk about being relentless and diligent So you must never give up. You must be relentless and diligent. Means you've got to have that sharp focus on what matters to young people.
And do you believe that technology can play a role in transforming education and addressing educational challenges?
Of course it can. We can't ignore technology. You know, before the pandemic, we started in Glasgow on a project that would give every pupil an iPad. So looking at the kind of equity issues, so we knew that some young people had access to laptops and things, but some young people didn't. So 50,000 iPads were issued across the city, and we got pilloried in the media for it, about how this was a terrible waste of money, and did I not know that this would never work? And then the pandemic came, and I felt like saying, who's laughing now, pal? Because we accelerated the issuing and we worked, but we were very focused that this was not about the technology taking over the craft of learning and teaching. The technology had to complement it. And we had a few schools that were absolute stars. I went to see one of them, Castlemilk High, and they used an app from Apple that, and what the young people told me was it transformed their learning. So it meant what they could do is they could get almost instant feedback from the teacher. So the teacher they would submit their work on the iPad. The teacher would add voice notes. They would add voice notes. They would add, so we were communicating with young people in the way that young people communicated with each other. And therefore they were much so, no, forget the red pen, add a little voice note, add a little, they could submit videos, but they could equally, they could drop a little note to their pastoral care teacher, to their guidance teacher, things that were worrying them. They could, without having to go along the corridor, knock on the door, find out that the teacher wasn't there, actually they could just drop that little note to them. So there you go. Hold on. What's my husband's hope? Yes? No. No. Oh no. Okay. Okay. Oh, it's one of my neighbours is not there. Which they're a bit worried about. Anyway. It's okay. It's an elderly man.
Okay. Is he okay?
No, they don't. They're not. His son's at the door. They're not quite sure, but he could be down. Somebody could have taken him out.
Oh, okay.
Sorry about that interruption, but
It's okay, don't worry. Do you think, like, there's in some circumstances, there's parents who believe, education and all the challenges that come with it is, the school's responsibility and they don't want nothing to do with it. If the children are not performing at the best, the teachers are to blame. What role do you believe that the community engagement and parental involvement will play in addressing those educational challenges and fostering student success? Because I believe that a student's or a success is not just a school's responsibility or a school's. It's many people, like they have a network. Like as I looked after a child, I have a network. So I have my social worker, I have my support staff at the care home that I live in, all three of them on shift at every single time. The managers, the thing, and that's a access that I have, virtual schools and stuff like that. But and I'm given extra support because I don't have a family that that I engage with in terms of that and stuff like that. And I think young people, students, regardless, should be given the same support. For like a family should be, or whoever their primary caregivers are, should be supporting them with their education. Because success is not just one person's responsibility. It's the students, depending on the student's age, but the students, the parents, the school. And
I agree. I totally agree. And that's where I think, you hit the nail on the head. That's where we need to be professionally curious about the background. And the other bit that teachers sometimes are is a little bit judgmental, so they can be jump to conclusions. So I come back to that, the one good adult. So that one good adult in your life could be a parent, could be a grandparent, but could be a teacher, could be a social worker, could be a youth worker. It's somebody who takes that interest in you, but is that consistent adult in your life. And that's the important bit. We found with the mentoring, what the young people tell us is it's the fact that I'm volunteering. I'm not being paid to go in to spend 40 minutes or an hour a week with this young person. And it's totally voluntary, if that's the bit they love. And we don't sit in, hidden away in a corner where she's identified as being special. And we sit out in a public area, and the young people are really proud. And you get all these different adults coming in and sitting with the young person, and they're absolutely up for it. It never sees. I just think I would think, oh God, I'm being highlighted here. But no, they're actually quite proud of it because they recognize somebody's taking an interest in them. And, for parents, if you take a nursery involvement, then that's easy because you take that little person and you're physically going into the nursery with them and you're handing over and you interact with the member of staff. So the member of staff can pick up on how you are as a parent or as a grandparent. But in primary, the child goes in and the parent's in the classroom. There's still that opportunity and there's still a link for a bit of a dialogue. But then you get to secondary age, and God, the last thing you want to see is your parent anywhere near the school. And it's much harder for parents, isn't it, to engage with the school. And the schools need to be, and sometimes schools go out of their way to kind of bring this kind of harshness so that actually, we're the very clever teachers, you're out there, leave us the job, we're doing the learning. When actually, a lot of that young person's life is spent in that house. As you say, whoever the primary caregiver is, therefore we need that partnership. We need the messages in the house being as positive. And one of the interesting projects that has been going on in Glasgow, and it's continuing after I left, is working with the children's houses and working with the social work teams there on nurturing approaches so that the same language and understanding is being used in the children's houses as is being used in the school. And we're getting fantastic feedback from both the young people and from the social care workers about the difference that's making and the confidence that children who are care experienced are feeling.
Yeah, and it gives ability, I feel like especially when, volunteers come in and stuff like that, they're like, oh my God, this person actually cares about me. And if your home is like, I don't know, I'm going to use me as an example. If your home is a place that is like, my parents' home is very abusive, it's very hostile, it's a very unsafe place to be.
Yeah.
But like my social worker will come out of hours past 5 o'clock to spend time with me. It's not like, oh, are you okay? Okay, great, lovely, goodbye. It's like, oh, so what do you want to do in the future? What's your favorite thing to eat? And to have interpersonal relationships.
Correct.
It's
one good adult.
One good adult that could change your life.
Right.
And you know what? I'm doing some training at the beginning of next month for Merton Local Authority, which is the local authority that looks after me, on relationship-based practices.
Oh,
They
brilliant.
are transformative, and it's really, like, I feel like it takes just one person that checks up on you. And you know what? A young person I have social, emotional, and mental health difficulties. And I'm also neurodiverse. So
No,
I'm
you know,
also,
no, they're not social, emotional, and mental health difficulties. They're social, emotional, and mental health needs.
needs.
So don't call them difficulties. Call them needs. So
Mm.
in that way, you're taking a strength-based approach, not a deficit. So language is really important. So if you say SEMH, that's a horrible acronym, but if you add difficulties onto that, there's a dip, isn't there?
Yeah.
But if it's needs, then there's a gap. So just something needs to be addressed. It doesn't make it difficult. It just means
Yeah.
you need something. So call them
Very
needs.
true. So I have social emotional mental health needs
Well
and
done. Well done.
neurodevelopmental needs. I kind I write that when I say that, I write it like that. I just don't say it like that. Interesting observation. Anyway, and what was I going to say? What were we talking about? Um, what were we talking about? Sorry, my mind
Yeah,
just went.
so it was about in the home and having
Yeah,
that one good adult, and particularly when you have social, emotional, and mental health needs.
yeah. One of the placements I used to live at. It came to I was really struggling with my mental health. I was like, oh my God. And I would often try to kill myself or whatever. And I ended up in a psychiatric ward. This was my second admission. And near the end, when it came to my discharge, like after 2 months of admission, they said, Royce, me, we love and we care about you. But if you continue to go to the train stations, we won't be able to care for you and keep you safe. That day, for a year and a half, I did not go to the train station. I decided that moment in time, they loved and cared for me. Whilst I was in hospital, they will visit. There was somebody visiting me every single day.
Yeah.
Every single day. And these are not my parents. And I'm like, okay, this is one of the first few good experiences I had whilst I was in care. And I was like, ooh, I like this. And because you feel loved and cared for and somebody is so genuine, you're willing to transform like what was my so-called coping mechanism. I was like, no, I'm not going to go to the train station. No matter how difficult it is to
Yeah.
deal with that emotion or how I'm feeling, I won't go to the train station. And I did it, and the placement lasted for a good 18 months.
Ah, good.
So and then once you have that one good person or a group of good people,
Right.
everything else will fall into place.
Yeah.
I don't know if you heard of this poem that it's called Because I Ain't Got a Pencil.
Oh, I have. I've seen it. Yes. It's fabulous. It was
Yeah.
it's so true, isn't it? Yeah.
I feel like that poem is it's a very short poem, but it's so powerful.
Yeah, absolutely.
Absolutely, yeah, absolutely. It was like, and I heard this. I feel like I mentioned it every other podcast because what I learned about the poem, I think it was by one of our guests, and then I've been like mentioning it to every other podcast. So yeah, it
Yeah,
is
it's
such
lovely.
a poem. Can you highlight any like specific policies or reforms that you believe are necessary to address challenges faced by the education system and institutions?
So I think in Glasgow, we set ourselves an ambition to be a nurturing city. And that was our hook. That was our hook to say we needed to show compassion and care, but it had to be steeped in evidence-based approaches. So it wasn't just, I used to challenge people and say, this is not about being soft and fluffy. Actually, this is about attachment. It's about trauma informed, and it's about showing compassion and care to each and every child, and understanding that some children have different needs. So it's equity. We need to make more adjustments for some children in order to be able to positively meet their needs. And it's not rocket science, right? This is not it's challenging, but it is not beyond the wit of all staff to be able to do this, but you need to invest in your teachers. So you need to invest in your teachers and your support staff, invest in their learning, and so that they understand. So for example, they understand neurodiversity. So they understand that some people think not in a straight line, or they just think differently. It doesn't make them poorer or otherwise. And some people react in different ways because of the contextual, their context, they may react. So for teachers, in some cases, they need to be able to both physically and metaphorically take a step back, take a step back from the young person and have a long, hard think about different ways and give young people those choices. So, the relational practice you spoke about, we need to have more and more training in that. Not not people talk about it as if it's just about relationships. It's not just about relationships. It's about relational practice. It's about one good adult. It's about positive noticing. It's about using the right language when you're talking. So it's a strength-based approach. So every young person has strengths. Sometimes it takes a little bit of time for us to find them. And sometimes we might have to work a little bit harder to find those strengths, but there are little tools and things that we can use, solution-oriented meetings, and moving back to that strength needs analysis and moving away from a deficit approach. And the language that we use to describe our young people needs to be asset-based, needs to recognize their strengths. And we need to call out the people who are talking about young people and their families in a more negative way in the staff room, or we need to call them out in the same way that we would expect anybody to be called out if they said anything that was sectarian or racist. Or we need to have that positive approach to and value. I come back to my compassion and care for all children. So I think relational practice absolutely integrated in across the education system.
What resources and training are available for educators to enhance their understanding of trauma-informed practices or learning?
There's tons of it out there. There's mountains of it. But what we need is a systemic approach to it. So there's lots of providers out there that will provide training on trauma-informed, on relational practice. And I think, trauma-informed, we need to be careful that trauma-informed doesn't become a self-fulfilling prophecy, so that somebody looks at you and says, oh my goodness, look how many adverse childhood experiences she's had. That means statistically, she'll never be able to do this. Actually, you can have adverse childhood experiences and use them to build your resilience and actually become a stronger, better person as a result of those. They don't have to be a deficit. So there's lots of providers out there, and there is no one provider that you would say is, oh, go to that one or go to that one. The work that I'm doing in London just now, I'm talking to lots of different people and recognizing that it is not just about do it this way or do it that way. Actually, it's about looking at the context of you and your school and then working out what provider might match the best to what you're doing. And it's not just about the provider coming in, it's also about how your school is set up, the learning environment. Is it the right lighting, the right furniture? How can we make it the best place, for a more welcoming, safe and secure place for children to come?
What are some of the potential challenges educators may face when implementing trauma-informed learning practices, and how can they overcome those challenges?
Well, I mentioned one already, which is that the adverse childhood experiences become self-fulfilling. You know, that you say, oh my goodness, that young person's not going to, and you lower your expectations as a result. So I think that's why we've worked very hard to keep asset-based language, to keep that strength-based approach. So you don't talk about difficulties, you talk about needs. You don't talk about, I hate the term special education, because I'm not sure it's special. Is it not that those children just need additional support? So in Scotland, we call it additional support needs. Whereas in England, and in other parts of the country, it's SEN and SEND. It's just, I think we need to make sure our language recognizes the strengths that everybody brings, and taking that solution-oriented approach, knowing that we can and do make a difference each and every day, stops us going down a bit of a deficit route. But trauma-informed forgiving, I think, is really important, because I think we need to understand the context and therefore why some children respond the way that they do. It's not an excuse, it's a context.
How, like, I feel like recently there's been like a lot of like in the recent years there's been a lot more awareness and much more research into neurodiversity. How do you think the concept of neurodiversity reshapes traditional approaches to education?
So I think I worry a bit about labeling, right? So I worry a bit about labeling. I was at a conference, and honestly, it's everybody who was up speaking, and it was like Alcoholics Anonymous. I'm Maureen and I'm neurodiverse, and neurodiversity affects me this way. And then I went up to speak and said, well, like, I'm really sorry, I'm not neurodiverse, and I'm feeling a bit isolated because it appears that I'm the only one in the room who doesn't have some kind of neurodiverse need help. And I do worry that labeling is, but some people like labels and the labels help. I think what's much more important is that we develop an understanding and acceptance that people are different. And when I would speak to people and they would say, oh, it's all this with autism. And I would say, well, remember when you were at school, there was that boy generally in the class, and he would never take his hood down, or he stood by himself in the playground and repeatedly twiddled with something. They would go, oh, yeah, I remember him. He was a real weirdo. And I said, well, the chances are that person was undiagnosed autism. So autism has been around forever. And similarly, ADHD. And I like the fact now that ADHD is being seen as an asset, that it's being seen as actually a strength. So the ADHD Foundation, have you looked at some of their stuff? Yeah. They're great. I love their stuff, because they take that very much child-centered, strength-based approach. Whereas when I first started teaching, children with ADHD were getting an ADHD diagnosis and then being filled with drugs, as opposed to now seeing it as that's actually just the way they're wired. And if you take little children, so 4 years old, 5 years old, are they ADHD? Are they autistic? Are they poorly parented? Which one is it? So actually, we shouldn't jump too quick. Some children, you'll be able to do a diagnosis at 2 or 3 because of language development. But for others, let's be patient. Let's be patient, understand the whole child, and try to meet their needs before we jump too quick to a diagnosis.
Yeah, I feel like diagnosis. Either people are too quick to jump to them, or they take forever.
Yeah.
Like with my autism diagnosis, I got diagnosed with autism when I was 15, and I got diagnosed with ADHD at 16.
Yeah.
And it's like, especially if you're a girl or a woman, female, like you people, because it's different, it manifests differently in females,
Absolutely.
and
Yeah.
it's like
And
then it's like, okay, then people wouldn't know what additional support to put in place. I
uh,
feel like the amount of research has increased for females, but again, it's not at the best but most appropriate pace that it's going at. That could be
yeah.
questioned. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I think now it is much better now that we're developing that understanding and seeing it come back to taking that asset-based approach. So actually, if you look at entrepreneurs, the chances are, so successful entrepreneurs, the chances are they're neurodiverse. That's what makes them successful.
Yeah, I feel like I've like on autism and my autism ADHD, they're like my superpowers. Like I can
Yeah,
do 80 CPD courses in 30 minutes,
yeah,
whereas somebody else, it would take them a few weeks to do them.
correct. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. It's an asset, not a deficit.
Definitely. How can schools and education and all institutions, environments, I prefer environments, how can schools and educational environments better support the needs of neurodiverse students in the future?
I think it is, we've covered quite, but I think this is just about understanding their needs and
Yeah.
taking that strength-based approach as opposed to jumping straight to a diagnosis and seeing it as a deficit. So recognizing that actually sometimes you have to go with the flow. So we had a young person who care experienced, clearly ADHD too, wanted to be transgender. The school said, well, what will we do? Well, you'll respect their wishes for a start off. And if they wish to change their name, if they wish to have a different gender, let's go with the flow. And so after, I don't know, a month, they came back and said they changed their mind. Well, actually, it was probably just a bit of a manifestation of being a teenager and their ADHD. But they're exploring themselves and their emotions. So our job as school is not to judge or to jump in a certain direction. We're there to support them and help them through it because being a teenager is really challenging.
And do you mind if we move on to a completely different
Of
direction?
course. Yes.
How do you feel about free school dinners? How do free school dinners play a role in addressing food insecurity and supporting students' well-being?
So I have kind of two different views on it. So free school meals, great. Absolutely. Everybody gets that hot meal every day at lunchtime, and that's positive. Does it address food insecurity? I'm not entirely convinced about that, but it does give them a good meal every day. Should it be universal? Absolutely, everybody. If you come from a privileged background, why are we giving those free school meals? Could that money, could that resource, this is the Director of Education, I mean, could that resource be better used elsewhere? And then I jump back again. See, I jump back and forth across this fence. And then I jump back again and I say, yeah, well, where would you put the threshold? Because currently the threshold for free school meals is probably too low. You know, in terms of if you're just above that, actually, you're not earning that much. and with the cost of living and everything else. So I would rather that we lifted the threshold right up and we had more people getting access to free school meals. But I can see the benefits from a politician of having a universal policy. But I also think it needs to be sometimes a free breakfast. Would a breakfast be better, actually? Do you know that when you come into school, you're fed before you start your day?
I feel like food insecurities can have, like, you know, significant like effects on, like, you know, children's academic performances and overall development.
Absolutely.
It can, like, you know, lead to, because if you don't, you know, there's like poor concentration, decreased cognitive abilities, and lower academic achievement.
But sometimes for some, yeah, I totally agree. But for some children, it's having something at breakfast time. So we've got schools that make toast, and they make toast, and as the children are out in the playground, there's staff walking around with plates of toast, just giving them a little bit of toast to help start their day. Secondary schools that have offered free breakfast, and that does make a difference. And that makes a huge difference.
And not only when it's exam season either.
Absolutely, I agree. So yeah. Anyway.
What how can, like, I feel like schools can, like, should be teaching about food insecurity in class. I feel like it's a lot of young people go through the food insecurities and they're not aware of it. And by them being, you know, a bit more aware of it, they might be able to, you know, reach out for more help. But it's also important to make sure that the children don't feel embarrassed about getting free school dinners. Schools can do, you know, things like meal programs that are free to everyone, so it's not obvious who needs them, and it just creates a much more of a healthy environment.
Yeah. I mean, the argument around universal free school meals means that it removes the stigma. It removes the stigma entirely because everybody's getting it. So nobody is highlighted in any way at all. There are some clever ways that you can reduce the stigmatism, you know, having a card that money automatically goes on, and so everybody gets a card with money on it. But I think you do have to be careful about saying that we would be teaching about food insecurity. You can take, if you looked at it from kind of a children's rights point of view, so if you were embedding children's rights into the curriculum, you could talk about the United Nations Convention of the Rights of the Child and the right of a child to be healthy. And what does that mean in London? And what does that mean in Malawi? What does that mean in Somali? And therefore taking that, so rather than teaching about food insecurity, actually you're taking a global perspective and saying, what are the rights of a child? Well, that a child has a right to be fed. So I think it can be taught in that way, that it's not explicit about food insecurities, but it's teaching our children to be the global citizens of the future.
Definitely, that statement is empowering in itself. How can educational environments and policymakers collaborate to ensure the future of education is adaptable and learner-centric? Guest bespoke.
So I think that's about developing the right policies at government level, at local level, and then at school level, isn't it?
Yeah.
And having a golden thread that runs through those policies. But I've said before, it's not about everybody doing the same thing, but it's about having those policies all aligned so that schools feel empowered and enabled to be able to be more learner-centric, more based on the rights of the child, keeping those rights firm and centre to it.
What steps can individuals take to embrace lifelong learning and stay relevant in a rapidly changing world?
So I think that's what you do. So that's what you do. You access learning in lots of different ways. And that's where technology is fantastic, isn't it? Because it's enabling you to access learning in lots of different contexts. And well, we need to do more to teach our young people to make those ethical decisions. Is what's written in Wikipedia true? Is what we're getting out of artificial intelligence accurate? But the world is now changing at such a fast pace. I mean, I've just found ChatGPT and I love it. So that, you type in a question and it just goes whoosh. It's just brilliant. I mean, how is that for expanding your learning network? But what I've had to learn is even Bing as a search thing, using artificial intelligence, you've got to ask the right question. So, it's in my best Glasgow parlance, it's guff in, guff out, isn't it? If you put a guffy question in, you'll get a guffy answer out. So I need to hone my skills in asking and phrasing the questions in the right way to get the answer that I'm looking for. So are we doing enough with our children and young people to help them access all that learning? And then for me, it's about that passion for learning. So you're learning forever, isn't it?
How do you envision the future of education, considering the importance of adaptability and lifelong learning?
So I think, well, education is of course here forever. But we need to embrace technology and we need to, I suppose it's the learning about neurodiverse, isn't it? It's about saying that we're not all wired the same. We all have different needs. And actually, education still is the power to change the world. It's the Nelson Mandela thing, isn't it? It is. Education is the most powerful tool to eradicate poverty, to change the world, to address public health. It's education. Education. It's Tony Blair. Oh, I'd hate to use that one. Education, education, education. But we have to invest and recognize that our young people are those global citizens. And how do we ensure that we meet their global needs, not just their learning, but the learning, the well-being, and the list is endless, but education is absolutely at the heart of it. But education needs to move with the times too.
What advice would you give to current leaders in the education sector based on your experiences?
Oh, to rise up, to get above all the shock of the day-to-day issues and see the big picture. See the big picture, but also to be humble and to listen to the voices of children and young people. And that's where the success lies, is listening to the voices of children and young people and bringing that humility into your role.
And do you have any advice for the educators, students, and parents in navigating the future of education?
They need to influence education. They don't need to navigate it. They need to influence it. We need active influencers to make sure that each and every child has access to a high quality education, not just those that fit into the square pegs or the round holes that we happen to have made. So we need influencers and changers. That's what we need. And young people who have influenced education, we need to help guide them and to make them the positive influencers, because it's dead easy as a teenager to have a good old moan about how rubbish everything is. I don't want that. I want a solution. I want to know what would make it better. And then not all their ideas are going to fly, but let's negotiate and talk about which ones would fly, and if ones don't fly, well, let's negotiate why they won't fly, because maybe I don't have all the answers. Maybe I don't know. And so I think adults nowadays need to have a greater sense of humility in our changing, fast-paced world.
And finally, what is one thing that you're grateful for today?
Oh, the opportunity to be able to debate education with young people.
That's lovely. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you.
Oh my God, you know what? I feel like I say this at the end of majority of my podcast. My editor needs to edit this out, but I really do feel inspired. I really do.
Oh,
And
good. I'm glad. So do I. I'm so pleased that you got in touch.
yeah, I'm glad I did too, because I got to meet you. You're such a lovely, hilarious, and like well-informed person.
I need to
Thank you.
get you out pushing our inclusion charter when we get London's inclusion charter, being as you're a London's young person. So you
Yeah.
still at school, have you left?
No, yeah, I'm still in education. I'm in ethos.
What does that mean?
Education other than at school. There's somebody that comes to see me.
All right, okay. Is that because, so this is just for my learning, is that because school doesn't fit?
It's no school is able to meet my needs. And
Why?
so, okay, so either because autism and ADHD, they're very different sometimes,
Yeah.
and in some ways they're very similar. So they can either meet my autistic needs, but they can't meet my ADHD needs. Or let's just say they're able to meet my mental health needs, able to safeguard me and all that sort of stuff.
Right, okay.
Then they won't be able to meet my educational needs because they had the expectation that's so low that they're like, oh, wait,
Right,
we didn't
okay.
expect you to be performing
Clever.
academic well.
Ah, so
Yeah,
that's a bit annoying.
yeah. And it's
Yeah.
like, I'm much more suited in a one-to-one provision,
Okay.
and they wouldn't have me because of my intellectual capabilities. That's the exact
And I
word.
bet you argue back with them too.
Yeah, I'm like, yeah, that's
Yeah.
fine. So me,
Oh, good.
I'll find
Then what are
somebody.
you going to do? What are you going to do? You're going to get any qualifications?
So I got my I'm getting my qualifications at the end of next month or sometime next month
Okay.
for my maths. But I got my level 2 English whilst I was in the psychiatric ward. So
All right, okay. Okay. And then what are you going to do?
I want to open up care homes for young people with high level of complex needs, as well as I want to join the army.
Oh, very good. But will the army have you?
Oh, that's the
What do you
question.
think? Yeah.
I don't think they would, but
No,
knowing me,
because
I'll quite.
they're very compliance oriented. I don't think I could do the army either because
Yeah,
they're so it's the compliance, but I've never been very good at
I feel
compliance.
like it's like the thing is, that's why I would apply for a leadership role more than a.
Yeah.
I can't. The one thing that I can't do is if I know something is ethically not right, and I know that I can do what you've asked for in a much more ethical way,
Yeah.
I would. And the thing is, I'm not like social services know this. People that are in placement know this. Everybody knows this. I'm not going to nod my head. If I'm going to go down, I'm going to go down with a fight.
Yeah, maybe not the army then. Maybe not the army. Maybe third sector.
Yeah.
Third sector, community-based organization.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to build with my trauma's chronic but my chronic. Then eventually, like we're trying to get funding sorted and investors so we can do like therapeutic sessions, like art
Right, okay.
therapy, and then like
Yeah.
eventually expand to like actual like talking therapies that are specialized in trauma specialists and stuff like that.
Right, okay. Very
Yeah,
good. Good. Well, it's been great to speak to you. Thank you so much.
thank you so much.
No, thank you.
This has made my day so much. Like, oh, it's an early birthday present.
Great. Okay.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Bye.
In my conversation with Maureen McKenna, we've discussed the importance of adaptability and lifelong learning in education. We explored how educational systems can prepare students for a rapidly changing world and the role of technology shaping the future of our education. One key takeaway from our conversation is the recognition that adaptability and lifelong learning are crucial skills for individuals to thrive in an ever-changing world. Maureen emphasised the need for educational institutions and policymakers to adapt and meet the changing needs of students and the job market. We also reflected on the transformative power of education in shaping lives. Maureen highlighted the role of educators in fostering a love for learning and creating inclusive classroom environments that empower all students. I want to express my gratitude to Maureen for sharing her valuable insights and expertise. Her passion for education and commitment to empowering both educators and students was truly inspiring. If you'd like to know more about Maureen's work or connect with her, you can visit her website or follow her on social media. I encourage all listeners to reflect on the power of education in transforming lives and consider how they can contribute to creating a brighter future through lifelong learning. Thank you again, Maureen, for your time and for sharing your wisdom with us.